students have agency, the relationship between the teacher and the student becomes a partnership. Students have a strong self-efficacy, bringing a stronger sense of agency to the learning community. And the learning community supports agency and fosters self-efficacy. So this is the quick summary of what I'm going to speak. When I first heard about the word agency, I first heard the word agency in 70s. And that is the time when the businessmen had an agency, which means like they have an agency for Bombay dyeing, or they were agency for kerosene oil, and they had agency for Mafatlal fabrics and so on. So, and they were very powerful because there was only one agency in the city, and they felt very powerful. So, learner agency is something similar, but in a different context. I will call it, they are intellectually powerful. And my active involvement with the International Baccalaureate for over 31 years, and especially this learner agency is something which is generously used in the primary years program of the IB. And I have been involved mostly with the secondary school as principal for the last 15 years, and the middle years and the diploma. I used to see the students in the primary year completely engaged and doing things, and I would wonder what is going on, these young children, grade 2, grade 3, grade 1, taking charge of their learning. So I'll try to focus on that. And learner agency is connected to a student belief in their ability to succeed, which is self-efficacy. And it has got 3 elements: voice, choice, and ownership. When a student, there are 2 possibilities. When a student expresses opinion, it is heard by the teacher and something is done. That's one possibility. The second is the voice is encouraged, but not supported by giving time and space to exercise that choice. So those are 2 possibilities, and there should be trust between the teacher to test out different options and having space to make mistakes and wrong choices along the way. In the first month, what I've seen is the students learn about learning and learn about themselves, and which sets the stage for the rest of the year. I'm going to make a controversial statement a little bit. The current educational system was designed for teachers to control and manage their learning. This continues today because teachers are the one held accountable and responsible for their learning instead of the learners. They all need skills and tools to learn independently. So that was, some of you may not agree with that, but that's where the learners have to take responsibility for their learning. So I'll go on to what are the attributes which a student should show when they are showing learner agency. So I'll go through 2 slides very quickly, and then I will focus on strategies to foster learner agency. And that way I can give you a lot more examples. See, I'm not saying anything. When teachers support learning agency, what happens? You can read it. I'm not reading. Okay. So I will now focus strategies to support agency, and this way I can spend more time on this, because these are practical things. Students learn by doing. Teachers create opportunity for agency in the classroom by involving students in the following activities. The first one is about establishing a respectful and welcoming culture. You know that we all want a shared agreement between the students and the teacher in the classroom. How do they interact with each other? How do they respect each other? How do they trust each other? How do they feel welcome in the class? How do they feel valued in the class? How do they feel emotionally safe in the class? And if these kind of agreements are established in the classroom, I think it makes it very, very easy. The other possibility is establish a classroom board where they can identify problems, questions, and ideas and offer solutions. And this could be done in the morning time during homeroom. Other is, which I saw, was group of students, cliques, sitting in the classroom, and that is considered to be a cool group, making others uncomfortable. The peer pressure is there to get into that group. A few years ago, when I was principal in a school in Bangalore, there was the class 6th girls troubled me for 2 years, actually. Excuse me. Because they were doing all this, making other students very uncomfortable. And so I spent a lot of time, then they would be okay for some time, and then would again carry. I had to seek some counseling help, not me, the students. The student counselor then started spending time with them. Also, one was the other thing, voice, choice, and ownership. As a principal, when I'm implementing some discipline with the students, the teachers would, whenever would they see any violation in the discipline, they would look somewhere else. So what we did is we discussed all the discipline possibilities, regulations, rules, and so on, and teachers prepared it in this, and then they took ownership of it. It was much easier to implement that. Same thing happened when we had a teaching and learning essential agreement with the teachers. They would just ignore it. One fine day, we had a PD day, and we had a discussion for the whole day, and they created this document, they discussed it, and by the end of the day, we had a essential agreement on teaching and learning. It was much easier after that, because then they took ownership of that document, and majority of the teachers started following that, and actually they knew what was there in the document. In other cases, they didn't even know what they were talking about teaching and learning. And there are always some people who will ignore it anyway, and every organization, every school will have that, and we also had our share who considered God's gift to mankind. The second one is creating shared routines, asking students in developing routines around arrival, transitions, classroom time, communication signals, meetings, cleanup, dismissal, and so on. If you involve the students in these kind of things also, they certainly feel very important. And again, create a shared agreement. In the primary years program, there's a lot of flexibility. So if they want to do some activity or creativity, then give them that time. Maybe once a week have a totally creative day. Let them be doing creative things throughout the day. And I think if you do that, students feel that they are actually taking responsibility of their learning. The third is the setting up the learning space, and ask them to help to arrange the learning space, access to the resources, make choices, take risk. But at the same time, when you are grouping and regrouping, explain the rationale sometimes of changing personal spaces, because you will see some students tend to sit together, and if you explain the rationale, change the personal space on a regular basis so that they can interact with each other and contribute to learning of each other. Next is making decisions about learning. Involve students in making decisions in terms of what, why, and how they learn, and make them as a collaborative partner. You know that before you start a unit, you have to do assessment of prior knowledge. By taking data from the assessment of prior knowledge and then planning what they wanted to learn, how they wanted to learn, and how are they going to get feedback, and also how will they know what they have achieved in their learning goals. I think you can see the student is in the driver's seat, and that makes them very, very proud. And learning from each other is actually a very, very valuable resource. Communicating expectation, clarify what knowledge and conceptual understandings and skills the students are learning. If you communicate the clear expectations, it's so important. In the IB, we have almost all the assessments are criteria based. Students know exactly what is being assessed, how it will be assessed. Assessment is something you do with the students, not to the students. Emphasize on conceptual understanding and connect all learning to real world, making it relevant. Now, two things which impressed me in the primary years program, which we tried to sort of emulate in the secondary school, one was student-led conference. So the parents are invited, and a student in a classroom where students' work is displayed. They have documented all their learning, and so they show evidence of learning to their parents. Reflection takes place, self-evaluation takes place, organization takes place, communication takes place, and their self-confidence is very high when they're explaining all these things. And a teacher is sitting in the corner of that room, and the student is guiding all this. So these are called student-led conferences. So we tried to emulate it in the secondary school. From middle years program, from 6 to 10 was fine. They accepted it. There was no issue. But 11 and 12 were quite hesitant in the first year. They do not want their parents to be in the school talking about what they have achieved, what they have done, and so on. In the first year, there were few students, especially some of our foreign students were okay with that. Especially the Germans, they want to know rationale of every single thing you explain to them, and then they are fine with it. Otherwise, there is a lot of questioning takes place. The other one is three-way conference. Three-way conference, the students share their thoughts and perspective about their learning before hearing what their parents and teachers have to say. And that they feel that learning is theirs. And similarly, we have it in the secondary school in which the student is there, the teacher is there, and whenever the student would not come, I would not talk to the parent. I would say, I want the student to be here because I'm talking about him and he's not here. What you will convey to the student will be very different. But in primary, this is called a three-way conference. It's very, very useful because there again, the student is explaining everything. Teacher is only giving some ideas about the growth of the child, how they can improve and so on, and the parents also are contributing there. So these are some of the practical strategies which can foster learning agency. And the last part, I'll just quickly go over, I'm not going to explain that, is how to foster self-efficacy. Thank you.
Now, there. Student agency. You know, we're talking about this in the context of education, And it really comes back to this question, what is success? What is success in the classroom? And coming from this perspective on social and emotional development and growth, my perspective on this is that we're shifting from this definition of success through productivity towards this definition of success through well-being and flourishing. And in order to get there, we have to foster different skills. And this skill of agency, if you will, is something that we do think about in the C-Learning program. So my name is Tyra Lynn Frazier. I am the lead research scientist at the C-Learning program at Emory University. And C-Learning stands for social, emotional, and ethical learning. So I'm going to take you through the framework of our program. And in doing so, I want to demonstrate to you how we approach this idea of fostering agency. C-Learning was built on the ideas of trying to create a program that educates the heart, not just the mind. And these were the words from His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Emory University and His Holiness the Dalai Lama have had a long-standing relationship. And he came to Emory and he said, we need a program for K through 12 students, for primary and elementary students and middle school students, that actually helps them to cultivate some sort of an ethical foundation that is secular. And this is what we came up with. So if you'll put your attention in this 3x3 grid here, what we have done is we have noticed that in order to foster something in students, we need to decide what that something is. And so we've identified those somethings through this lens of awareness, compassion, and engagement. Awareness of self. What does that mean? That means attending and seeing yourself, having a sense of self-understanding. And then we want to be able to foster an understanding that sometimes when you see yourself, you don't always like everything you see. But that's okay. That's why we want to cultivate self-compassion. So you need to be able to see yourself, good, bad, authentically, through this lens of compassion. And then engage with yourself through skills of self-regulation to be able to elevate your abilities. We look at these dimensions of awareness, compassion, and engagement also through this lens of social interaction. At the level of awareness, you want to be able to understand and see sort of interpersonal dynamics. What is happening when I'm engaging with this person? How am I affecting this person? How is this person affecting me? And then you want to be able, just as you see yourself with compassion, to be able to engage with the other compassionately and see the other, good, bad, and otherwise, as a compassionate being just like yourself. And then you want to be able to act and engage with relationship skills that foster positive elevation within that relationship dynamic. And then the other domain that we focus on is this domain of the system. Because we are not just individuals or interpersonals existing. We're existing in these complex systems. And so that's something we want to be able to help students to understand. And so that is where we try to cultivate within students this awareness of systems. And we call this the appreciation for interdependence. And then once we have that understanding that we are living within interdependent systems, we want students to be able to recognize that within these interdependent systems, there is a sense of common humanity. So not just common humanity amongst those that I know here next to me in the spaces within my space, but those that are not represented in the room, those beyond my space. And so once I can cultivate that sense that there is a humanity beyond what I see before me, then I can start to understand how I, as an individual, can engage with my community and beyond my community and globally. So each of these, what we call components, within this framework, have enduring capabilities. And if you'll look on this side here, and I'm actually going to stand up and come behind you, you'll see that these are the enduring capabilities that define the skills that are needed to cultivate each of these 9 different components. So this is just a sort of a shootout of one example at the systems level. So for example, in the component of appreciating interdependence, how do we do that? In the C learning curriculum, we have what's called learning experiences that educators will deliver in the classroom to actually help support the fostering of skills of understanding interdependent systems and understanding that individuals live within a systems context. And this is true for each of these different components for recognizing common humanity. We try to give students skills or assist them in cultivating skills for appreciating the fundamentals of equality for all, and for appreciating how systems can affect well-being, and so on. And so this is what I'm showing you here is this is the framework, and this is how we have used the framework to develop actual objectives or enduring capabilities through which we have developed learning experiences. And within each of the learning experiences, we have framed them around what we call a pedagogical model. And this pedagogical model is grounded in this idea of agency. And what that means is what we first do, which you have to do, is we have to give the students some information, okay? But again, we give them not as, again, this term, the sage on the stage, but as the guide on the side. We say here, this is what we are going to do in this learning experience, and we are going to co-create and discover together. And as we co-create and discover together, we create an environment where the student can actually have a moment of critical insight. Aha, I understand that I exist in a system with others. I see that in my school. And then over time, we want to foster an internal experience such that this aha moment actually becomes an embodied understanding. So I say to the student, you know you exist in systems. Well, yeah, of course, I exist in systems like I drink water. This is something I know. So this is the sort of the pedagogical structure through which we have developed the learning experiences within the C learning curriculum that we have developed. And again, I'm just going to show you, this curriculum is available and open to any teacher who is interested. This is just an example of some of the places that we have gone to give workshops to help educators actually integrate the curriculum into their schools and into their areas. We have a long-standing relationship with educators here in India. We have been both in sort of the northern and in the southern parts of India. We actually have C Learning India, and that is the organization, if you're interested in learning more about C Learning, that you can reach out to and contact. We believe because delivering this curriculum takes sometimes a shift as an educator, sort of you're not just giving, but you're sort of doing with the student. So we have a lot of training opportunities. One of the ones that is most easily accessible is the C101 orientation. This is an open source online orientation program that anybody can access as long as you have access to an internet connection. And once you access it and once you go through the program, you actually have access to the full curriculum that we've developed. But this is just an example that when we talk about agency, sometimes it's this process, but it's a necessary process that takes supporting the educator and supporting the student in sort of making a whole classroom shift. So, thank you.
Hello? Hello? Hi. How many teachers are in the room today? Excellent, excellent. How many educators in general? University professors, parents, community leaders? Excellent. So I have some provocative thoughts and questions for you to contemplate agency. The first is something very important that may be apparent to you, or it may not be apparent to you, that the configuration of the modern global education system stems from the factory. Did you know that? Who works in a school here? Who works in a school? Raise your hand if you work in a school. This doesn't make sense because I asked how many teachers there were, lots of hands went up, and now only 2 hands are going up when you say work in a school. Good. Do you realize that you work in a factory? You do, right? In a people factory, person factory. And the interesting thing about a factory is, a factory does not give a lot of freedom. It's about mass reproduction. We're producing a product for society, right? And under very narrow confines. Let me ask you something else, because I don't know if I want to explore the idea of agency. Agency. What does agency mean? How can we bring agency in our classroom? So I would say that a way to think about somebody who does not have agency is a prisoner, right? In a prison. Does a prisoner have agency? Maybe a little bit. He can choose to go to the bathroom when he wants to, which is better than a student because they have to ask and they often don't get to go, which could lead to some very embarrassing situations. Does a forest have agency? A forest, if you were to play in a forest, the freedom to climb trees, the freedom to smell flowers, the freedom to play with an insect, the freedom to bathe in a river. I think that is an image to me, a metaphor for agency. However, simply letting a student run around in a forest, I think they will learn something, but they certainly need a little bit of guidance along those lines. Very sadly, and I shouldn't say sadly, because the factory school system that we live in has left some very, very important imprints on this world. We owe the factory mass literacy. The fact that all the people that do read, and doesn't mean that everybody reads, but the fact that they do read is a product of that system. So that's a very good thing. But now, what's extremely interesting is the factory has been replaced by something else. Do we know what that thing is? Here's a question. I'm going to put you in the student perspective. It's okay to be wrong. It's okay to... Nobody knows what's replaced the factory? Agency, but there's a reason. What is the central mode of production in the modern world? The computer, right? You're all holding computers in your hands. You're pointing them at me, almost like a threat, right? Those are computers. Computers, the factory shaped the entire society around it. The factory created our prison system, our hospitals. They all have the imprints of the factory. Now we have the computer. And the computer is very different. When a book is made in a factory, the same book is made 1,000,000 times. That's very good. We have 1,000,000 books, but there's not much freedom in the way that that book is made. Every book is exactly the same, right? That's kind of what we want for our students. Every student takes the same test. We want them all to do well. We want to produce these students and get them into society under the circumstances of mass production. The difference between a computer and a factory is everybody uses a computer a little bit differently. No two people use a computer in the same way. And as a result of that, I find this very promising because we are moving into a world where agency is possible because our central mode of production, the computer, which is going to start reshaping all of the society around it, it hasn't really done that yet because the factory still has a very strong hold on our society, but that change will happen. I'm certain of it. And that will allow people to have very individual and personal relationships with everything in their life, including education. Very nice idea. But how does it help you as a struggling Indian teacher in the factory system, right? It doesn't. It's like, oh yeah, I heard this guy speak, he had some nice ideas about forests and computers, ha ha ha, what's the next session, right? So one thing I'd like to think about, I'd like you to think about is, one of the purest expressions of the computer is the game, a game. And not a video game. A video game is, of course, an expression of the computer, but the dynamic, numerical, rule-based system that is at the core of the computer also characterizes games. The participatory nature of the computer. When you read a book, there's a little bit of interaction because you're thinking about it, but you don't change the book, you don't change the pages. When you use a computer, you are participating with the computer. You are choosing to go to Wikipedia, you're choosing to go to YouTube, you can even make a YouTube video and put it onto the internet. So games are participatory. You make decisions in a game. You have the ability to exercise agency. You have the freedom to make certain decisions within rules in a game. So I think that one of the practical things to start thinking about is, how can we learn the lessons of the computer and the game and import them to our classrooms? Because then we're going to start aligning our practices with the world that is coming, and we will have much, much happier and more engaged children. And when a child is happy and engaged, the learning goes through the roof, right? It's not a prison system anymore. They're not being forced to do things, they actually want to do it, and they learn enormously. So there's a few things there on a very practical level. One thing that makes games very entertaining and engaging is choice. Choice is very important. And there's such a thing as too much choice. If I give a child 150 different choices, that child will become paralyzed with too many choices. I don't know what to do. But if you give a child 3 choices, for example, you read a book and you say, you can do a comic, you can do a short play, or you can write a short story inspired by the book, those 3 choices will give the child agency. And a child can then make a choice and say, oh, I love writing stories, I love comics, I love putting plays. They're happy, they're engaged, and I promise you the product that they're going to produce is much higher than if we only give them 1 choice. And the reality is, choice is not always possible under our current circumstances. But one thing you can think about as a teacher or as an educator is, how can we build choice into the curriculum? Exercise your powers of creativity. One thing is that teachers will really improve their practice if they start thinking of themselves as creative designers. I'm going to create experiences for these children. Another element of agency, another element of learning in the forest and not in the prison, is exploration, to explore. Children love to explore. Adults love to explore. Anybody play video games here? Okay, good. So there's some video game players, right? One of the most entertaining things about playing a video game is exploring. Sometimes you play a video game with a wide open world and it's just fun to move around and explore the world or the dungeon or the tunnels and to see what's going on. How can we build exploration into our practice? How do we do it so that we together, the teachers and the students, explore ideas in such a way that we don't necessarily have the answers as the teacher? Let's put a difficult problem that even the teacher doesn't have the answer to, and let us all try to explore a solution for this problem together. Let us think, let us research, let us develop groups. And again, I think that students would have a much better time in that type of learning environment. So I've done a little bit of talking. I want to know, what problem do you see from what I'm saying? Or how is what I'm saying difficult to implement in your practice or in your world? So it's no problem? Wow, I'm very, very happy to hear this. This is excellent. We've just solved the education problem. Thank you. That's good. Oh, yes, sorry.
We are restricted. Restrictions of curriculum.
Right. So what types of restrictions are you working with?
I'm a school teacher.
Uh-huh.
I have to teach 5 classes up to grade 6 to 10th class. Then I teach social studies. Then I need to complete prescribed syllabus in prescribed days. If I give choices and exploration, if I want to complete a lesson, I will get at most 5 days. That means 5 into 45 minutes. That's it. Within the specified time, giving and these choices and exploration, the time not permits to do these things.
Mm-hmm. Fair enough. That's obviously there are big structural problems that are restricting your agency. So it's not just the student's agency that's being restricted, your agency as a teacher is being restricted. But I wonder, you teach social science, which means history and geography, right?
History, geography, economy and civics.
Excellent. And in that, do they tell you what assessments, like you have to give a test or you have to give a writing assignment, or is that your choice?
No, they are already, it is already structured.
So they do tell you you have to give them a test,
Yeah.
you have to do this.
Yeah.
Right. So everything.
Everything.
You have no decision-making process whatsoever.
Little is there. Now it is a CCE, continuous comprehension learning. In formative assessment, I do some assessment.
Okay. So obviously that's a very problematic situation, right? And are there, now is that a state or federal run mandate or district run mandate?
It's a state.
It's a state, right? Is anybody from the state here?
Yeah.
No, but at the policy level. At the level where you're making teachers follow these guidelines, youth.
Not from the state, but working in various states.
Right.
Yeah, not from the state, not a part of a government system, but just working in various states and exploring all over the countries. The thing, they are very right, because I'm working the primary education domain. There is a specific time, specific curriculum, specific assessment. Teacher is not in the position to have to do something on their own. That's a part which you rightly mentioned, the structural gap and structural limitation in the policy. That's there.
So what is the motive of the state to have so much control over the teachers?
I think sir is there, Naren sir, he could just speak on this because he is very much into and he's experienced of that.
Pardon me? So what I want to know is, what is the motive of the state to have so much control over the teacher, which then of course translates to so much control over the student? Standardization. Okay. And is there any chance that the state can be persuaded by using foreign models that are successful as a way to start rethinking this over-controlling and what will be an antiquated form of education very soon? Because I think one thing I do understand about India, it is very interested in progressing and being a progressive country. Using computers and having an IT industry is only one part of progress, right?
It is happening at various levels. Within the policy also, certain organizations also helping, just giving their models to the various states. And there are certain state governments also which are just, Andhra Pradesh is a very recent state which is just taking the happiness curriculum inside the curriculum. So it's happening, but the thing, because this teacher community is having an experience of about 10 to 15 years or 20 years or 25 years. At that time it is not like. I think that's what Naren sir comment would be and remark would be very helpful for us, because he understands and about the context of the country where we are.
Good. So I pass it over.
Yeah, I think carry on.
I think this is where I mentioned in one of the other panels there. I worked in very privileged schools, only IB schools. And it is very different there than what I have seen in the last 3-4 months, I've now, on behalf of UNESCO, started visiting the JNVs, the Jawahar Navodaya Vidyalayas, which are all in a very remote location. So I can give you some insight to what is happening there also. They may sack me after that, but in IB, what happens in the primary years program, all of IB's, a lot of open-ended projects take place during teaching and learning. And plus the culmination of that, in primary years, there is an exhibition, which is a very big project where a grade 5 student speaks. In grade 10, they do their personal project over a period of 1 year. And in diploma program, they do a research paper of 4,000 words over a period of 1 year. So plus that is the culmination, but otherwise there is a lot. But that is again, we are talking of 150, 155 schools in India. In CBSE, what is happening, curriculum is a big issue there. There's no doubt about it. Anything you want to do digitally with them, we don't have time. We can't do this. This is not working. Internet connectivity is not there, and so on. So unless I can tell you the previous HRD minister, again, there's no press here, I hope. Mr. Prakash Javadekar, he was going towards curriculum cutting down to at least 50% of what it was. Unless you cut down the curriculum, these things will not happen. Okay. At the moment, what is happening is they are just trying to complete the syllabus. Everywhere, that's where the focus is. That let us just complete the syllabus, students memorize everything, do the rote learning, there is an exam system there, and they do it. But that's not actually the active learning which is taking place in the schools. I don't have a solution to that. We are trying. I hope something can happen.
Just to add to the question, why is the government controlling schools at all levels? The reason being, I mean, so when you look at government schools, when the RTE was passed, after that till grade 8, you are not supposed to fail a student. So at that point in time, what teachers did was they shrugged off their responsibility of teaching because they knew no matter whether they taught or not taught, whether they assessed or did not assess, the child would end up reaching grade 8. So when that happened, I mean, say the checks and balances that the government tries, if you do it, I think that's one reason why at every level you have control. I'll give you an instance of the state government of Haryana. So the state government of Haryana, in fact, introduced a very transformative program, and you could see, the teachers getting back the kind of autonomy that they had. So it's all about whether, we as teachers are taking up the responsibility. If we don't, of course, the government would come in. So that's what I think.
And also,
so using your agency responsibly, right?
And also what is happening is a lot of administrative work is being thrust upon the teachers. They should be spending all their time in the classroom, teaching and learning, not doing administrative work. And that is something which is also causing this problem.
Maybe you can zoom us out.
So I'm just going to say thank you for my portion. It doesn't mean the questions are over, but I'm going to hand it over to our very capable moderator in order to conclude the session and perhaps take further questions on these topics. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I wanted to just zoom us out to the three presentations as a collective. And thank you, Narendra, Tyralyn, and Paul for these excellent, provocative presentations. I think one of the key elements that come out from all of you is the learner and the educator's agency and how important it is to interrupt the forces of social reproduction and really think outside the box and equip learners with skills that they need for our century and our millennia ahead, not for what was needed 200 years ago. We've seen different modes and dimensions and components of agentic educational approaches across the different programs discussed here. Our speakers have given us some examples and takeaways on the role of voice, choice, exploration, and ownership in the educational process, the importance of real-world connections between student learning and social issues, creating intergenerational learning communities, play-based learning that fosters agency, cultivating agency even in structures that seek to inhibit it, and the power of building agency through the cultivation of compassion. And so much more. And given the constraints of time, I know we're engaged in some ongoing discussion, but zooming out to look at all three presentations, I think we have the example that IB offers and Narendra's experience across the country, Tyra Lynn's example with this program that's working in India and other countries, really looking at that learner situated within the larger context of their life and their community. And then Paul's example of really taking these ideas from the forest and from games, really thinking about creativity and agency and how can we think about that in the context where all of you work. So I think we have a few minutes for questions. We don't have a lot of time, but perhaps we can throw the box around and get some questions, and you can direct them to one or all of the panelists. Let's go to someone who hasn't spoken yet. Yes, you haven't spoken yet. Here.
Tyrolyn, this is a question to you. I've gone through a similar course of CIT, so I'm asking you from that perspective. If I'm talking to students on forgiveness, and assuming that if a student has gone through a lot of abuse, how do you manage to, train them on how to be forgiving and how to get over a situation like that and go forward? Because unless I do that, I think I haven't set the ecosystem right for a student at all to go ahead with the education system.
Yeah, no, thank you for the question. So one of the things about our program is it's what's called trauma-informed. And what that means is, trauma is one of these things that we've all experienced on some level. Yeah. And that, as you say, the abuse, the adversity, the trauma, it impacts our ability for resilience. And in children, it dramatically impacts their ability for resilience. And when the child who is experiencing trauma comes into the classroom, it can be very, very challenging. Yeah. Now, in the context of trauma and compassion and forgiveness, we really want to think about the entry point with the child. You want to support the child in skills of being able to be with themselves and their bodies, and being able to recognize within themselves joy, even when it's hard. And so in our program, we have, the second chapter of our program is focused on the cultivation of resilience. And within that, we have very specific trauma-informed skills to actually support the child in finding ways of, first of all, teaching them about their nervous system. Yeah. And saying that, we all have these beautiful nervous systems that are built to respond when we're scared. Yeah. And sometimes we get in zones of emotions that are hard to get out of. And so how can we get ourselves back into the zone where we can think? Yeah. And so giving skills to do that, and giving them language to understand that, and then giving them space in the class to practice that is really foundational. And then once that's done, and they have some of those skills, then we start to talk about the more complex sort of interactive things. But we want to make sure that they're equipped to be able to do that first.
Thank you. I'll come back for a detailed discussion one-on-one.
Thank you. My question also with Fraser. In context of India, as you mentioned, there is one organization which is working in one particular geography. The question which I am perceiving, and it's happening here also, there is one geography, there is one framework which you're bringing in, that is C framework of SEL. First question is, there are N136 framework which Anantya had told in the morning in her session about the SEL. So there are lots of framework which is happening in that geography. So is there any impact because SEL framework is very contextual, and one framework happening, C framework is happening in one school, and the other school which is very near, these other kind of a framework which is happening. So is there any problem having that framework, or we have to take care of all these things and there should be something which is very contextual to that?
Yeah. So if I'm understanding I'm just going to repeat your question and make sure I'm understanding it properly. So what you're saying is that when you're talking about framework, you have these different programs that have been developed in specific areas, either regions of the world, and bringing those into other contexts and kind of mixing them up. Is there a problem?
Yeah.
Am I understanding correctly?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I mean, it's, the reality of the landscape of social and emotional development programs is pretty complex and messy. That said, a lot of what is out there is overlap. I think one of the challenges that I have when we talk about different programs and different frameworks is the first thought I have is about the burden of the educator. So my first question would be, how are these programs being brought into a region? Who is bringing them in? If we're just talking about school here is doing one thing, school there is doing another thing, I would wonder what is the conversation at sort of the district and regional level, because you want to have educators being able to sort of communicate with each other across schools. There's that, but the other part is that, it depends on the program. I mean, I'm not sure that there's this incompatibility. A lot of what we do at Sea Learning is really built on the shoulders of many other SEL programs. Again, it depends on how is it brought in, who's bringing it in, and what are some of the objectives within that school. I don't necessarily see that as a problem. Now, with regards to this idea of context, I see this giant time's up right here, so I got a little, but with regards to this idea of context, that is an issue. And sort of with any program, you do want to make sure that we spend a lot of time dealing with this issue of context to make sure it's contextually relevant and to make sure educators understand that that is something that they have flexibility with and agency with.
Thank you so much to this amazing panel, and thank you to our audience for engaging. And we have to wrap it up there, but I hope these conversations continue in the tea breaks and at all the other outside ways that we can keep learning from the amazing experts and all of you and your amazing experience as well. Thank you.
We have our last session of the day.